author of Cruising Through Caregiving, Reducing the Stress of Caring for Your Loved One. It's Jennifer Fitzpatrick, and we're asking the question today because so many people out there are taking care of older loved ones. Should I quit my job? So welcome to the show, Jennifer.
Thank you so much for having me on.
No, and happy to have you because truly this is becoming, I don't want to say an epidemic, but there are a lot of kids who used to be kids that are now taking care of their older parents or adults. Tell us a little bit about, how people can work through that.
Right. So many of us now, we are helping out with our older parents or even other loved ones, aunts, uncles. And, the fact is most of us work. Most of us have jobs. And in the past, especially, females stayed home with the small children. And when older parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles got sick or needed help, women were naturally available. And most women are out in the workforce now. So, and still most women are the caregivers. So it leads a lot of us to say, gosh, do I quit my job? Do I take a leave of absence? So yeah, this is a big issue that's hitting a lot of us right now.
Wow. And truly, when does it get to that, time? Because as you say, if you're driving, let's say 40 miles a day, your parents live across town and you are having to go back and forth every day, morning time to check on them, and then in the evening time, I guess that is a question that may pop up in someone's head. It might be easier for me just to quit my job and take care for them 100%.
Yeah, most caregivers who have a job, they at least consider, should I quit? Should I retire early? Should I go part-time? So I think most people start thinking about it when their loved ones' needs are taking up more than 10 hours a week. People start really thinking about, and again, it could be that your loved one lives in the same town as you or your loved one lives several hours away or cross country. But if you're visiting them more, if you're having to take time off of work, maybe you're getting into trouble or problems with your boss or your colleagues because you're not pulling your fair share, that's when people start really deliberating and saying, should I just quit? I mean, is this even worth it? The other time that people start thinking about it is if they think about, well, gosh, should my loved one go into assisted living or should I be paying for a home care aid? And sometimes people start doing math, and I call it bad math, because sometimes they might think, well, gosh, it's $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a month for assisted living. Well, if I'm not bringing in at least that much, shouldn't I just stay home and take care of that person? But you got to think about the long-term implications of that.
And obviously, it's going to be a stressful situation. There's no way around that, right, Jennifer?
Well, in Cruising Through Caregiving, the whole premise of the book is how to reduce stress caring for an older loved one. It's going to be stressful, but there are so many things that you can do to reduce your stress. And I think having a real serious, deliberate conversation with yourself and the other loved ones that are helping in the caregiving process about how do we go about this in an intelligent way? How do we go about this in a way that not one person is doing everything? We see oftentimes one person rises to the surface and they do the lion's share. How do we share this within the family? Or, how do we bring in community resources? There's resources for every budget. If you've got tons of money, that's fantastic. There's probably more resources out there for you. But even for those who don't have a ton of financial resources, we want them to at least start with their local area agency on aging. And if you want to find in your jurisdiction where it is, it's n4a.org. That's your local, it's a government agency or a nonprofit, depending on what jurisdiction you live in. But the federal government mandates that every jurisdiction have one. And you start there. You start there and you start looking for what kinds of services might help you and your loved one to reduce stress.
Well, and that's a good question because, as you mentioned, most people are trying to be the caregiver part-time. They come in the morning to check on their parents or they come in the evening to check on them. But when do you know for sure that it's time to put a loved one in a care facility? Because you're trying to keep them out, but it may come to a point where you're just going to have to.
Well, the top one that I always advise folks is if your loved one has an advanced dementia diagnosis, Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body dementia, frontotemporal dementia. When that person is unable to be alone for even a few moments because they might wander out the front door, when that person is, they're going to forget that they left the tea kettle on, that's when you got to look at full time, whether it's you're going to have another person in the house full time or you're going to move them to assisted living or nursing home. So to me, that's one thing if someone has advanced dementia. But the other thing is if someone doesn't have dementia, if they're completely dependent on other people, and if the family can't afford full-time help, then that's when you've got to make that hard decision because you've got to look at the best interest, not just of the older loved one, but of everybody in the family that's being impacted. Certainly you want to take good care of mom or dad or whoever that older loved one is, but you've also got to make sure you're looking out for yourself, your spouse, your siblings, anybody else that's part of that process because it takes a toll on everybody.
Yeah. We're speaking this morning with Jennifer Fitzpatrick. She's the author of Cruising Through Caregiving, Reducing the Stress of Caring for Your Loved One. She also is a gerontology instructor at Johns Hopkins University, certified speaking professional. And you mentioned earlier, Jennifer, about the stress that it does put on everyone and that, possibly there's one sibling that's going to rise to the top or, one child. But tell us how to also work out those relationships because there can be a lot of resentment that, one person is doing I'm picking them up, I'm taking them to the doctor, I'm, going to grocery shop for them, and the rest of y'all just sitting around waiting on them to die so you can get the insurance money.
Well, the one thing you got to remember is typically it is going to be one or two people that go into that lead role. I call that sort of the captain of caregiving or the primary caregiver. Usually it's one person. They step into that role. And if you're the sibling that steps into that role, I think the important thing is to know not everybody in your family is going to do an equal amount, but you need to let them know what you need help with. And if you're in that secondary role, and including through caregiving, I call this sort of the first mate role of caregiving. If you're in that secondary role, you need to always be looking for ways to help the primary caregiver. Because that primary caregiver is often not going to realize how burnout they're getting. It's really important to know that also whatever dynamics were going on in the family before caregiving became an issue are going to likely be magnified. If one person was the favorite, for example, or if there was sibling rivalry or, anything that was a dynamic within a family is probably going to be magnified under a stressful situation in caregiving.
Wow. Listen, words to live by there because I have seen it happen. I've seen siblings just go at it at each other and, before they were loving. And there's always some sibling rivalry, but, some nasty things have been said. And it's all, I think, like you said, because of the stress and because one or two people are taking on the roles of the other, 5. Can you at least come and, take them to church on Sunday? That'll give me a little break.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, what made you an advocate for the senior community? Because, obviously being the founder of Generations Health Education and working with geriatrics, what made you decide to do that?
I had a lifelong amazing relationship with my grandparents, and that made me really love working with older adults. I'm 43. I started working in this field, actually paid job at a nursing home when I was 16. So I've worked mostly in this field for most of my career in one way or another. And so, yeah, I'm just really passionate about helping people understand generational issues and, understanding how we can support and how caregiving does not have to disrupt our whole lives, how it doesn't have to destroy lives. It can be a really good time for families to bond together if they're making sure that one person isn't doing everything.
Right. And speaking of that everything, you mentioned earlier about work and how maybe there are people there who may not even know what you're going through because I think a lot of people don't like to share that. And for whatever reason, they just don't tell their bosses or their coworkers, listen, I'm dealing with an aging parent or, someone that needs a lot more attention. And so it may appear that they're slacking at work, but do you suggest that they do tell their bosses what happens or what has happened in their family?
Great question. I liken this, especially for females. I think a lot of females, especially executives, find themselves like they don't want to talk a lot about childcare issues because they don't want their boss to think, oh gosh, is she going to call out because her child is sick or something like that. I think the same thing, people get reluctant to discuss this at work with parent or caregiving issues with a family member. But I think you've got to have a conversation with your boss or your supervisor. And, don't give all the details. You need to let them know what you're going through. And many employers, I consult with lots of organizations. If you're a valued employee, most organizations want to work with you, whether it's flex time, whether you take a short leave of absence, and believe it or not, most people don't go to their human resources, and they really should, because many organizations, they have benefits in human resources that you wouldn't even know about that you can take advantage of. So, for example, I just was consulting with an organization. They have a service where they provide a certain amount of money for home care if you have an elderly loved one that you're taking care of. And this person would never have known it if they didn't inquire with human resources.
Wow. So the things you learn if you just open your mouth and say, I need help. And I love the fact that you also mentioned, looking for services on the aging and wherever you live, because truly there are services out there. There's people can maybe, there's a service that can take your loved one to the doctor instead of you taking off. They can transport them there or get them there or whatever. So there's always something out there that can help you.
Right. And listen, honestly, it's going to be easier if you have a bigger budget. There's going to be more options. But the best place that I always tell folks to start, the Older Americans Act set up the Federal Administration on Aging, and that mandates that every county or cluster of counties in the U.S. has an agency called your Area Agency on Aging. And you want to go to N as in Nancy, 4, the number 4, A as in apple.org. And if you plug in your zip code, it'll send you right to that. And it can, when you go there, they can talk to you about all kinds of free services, low-cost services, but also private pay, expensive services, so they can help you figure out ideas for things that can help your budget.
Sounds good. Jennifer Fitzpatrick, the author of Cruising Through Caregiving, Reducing the Stress of Caring for Your Loved One. It's going to be available this September 27th. Is when it's going to debut, and I'm sure very high on the best sellers list, because that obviously is something that our country, in particular the U.S., is dealing with, is the aging population and how we're going to deal with whether we stay on our jobs to care for parents or we don't. So thank you so very much.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Jennifer Fitzpatrick, the founder of Generations Health Education. Also, she's a gerontology instructor at Johns Hopkins University and a certified speaking professional and a geriatrics expert. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.